Okay, so for the next part of your notes, which is part 6, we're going to talk about standard and reference samples. Technically, those are kind of the same thing. A standard sample or a reference sample, they're sort of interchangeable terms. So what these are the samples that you would take from, for instance, a suspect at the police station. It could be samples that you take from the victim that are known origin. Right? I mean, we know exactly where they're coming from because we're taking those hairs or blood sample or whatever it could be from the people directly. What you do is you compare those samples to the crime scene evidence. So, you're trying to figure out, is this hair that we found at the crime scene, does it belong to our victim? Where's our victim's body, right? So that might help with comparisons. So here's just a couple of examples where you might be looking at standard reference samples being very important. Let's say you have a hit and run where some paint is exchanged between the cars. The paint that comes from the scraping on the car would be the crime scene evidence, and then the standard reference sample would be going to the car that you suspect left that paint and taking a sample of that paint from that particular car. Not any make or model similar to the car, but that particular car, okay? Hairs can be compared the same way like we just said. Blood stain evidence, if you have a big blood stain on a t-shirt, let's say on your suspect's t-shirt that you want to know, did it come from your victim? Then you're going to need some blood from the victim to compare it to, right? So that would be your standard sample. The easiest way to get a DNA reference is actually not with blood, but with what we call a buccal swab, which is just basically a swabbing of the inner cheek cells. The reason we use these cells is because they're very loosely attached to the inside of your cheek. It doesn't hurt at all to get a buccal swab done. Just kind of stick it in there, rub it around for maybe 5 seconds on either side, and then the Q-tip has basically picked up enough cells to run a full DNA profile. So how much do you need, right? Well, each time that you are dealing with standard reference samples, you probably need more than you might think, okay? So you are going to take probably, 50 samples of head hairs, pubic hairs, things like that. If you want to do a full blood review, you just take a blood draw, fill one of those vials with blood, okay? Now, another type of standard reference sample type thing is what we call a substrate control. And this is where we're looking at the substance that the evidence is sitting on, not the evidence itself, but what it's sitting on, to make sure that that material does not interfere with lab tests when we go to actually test the evidence. So substrate control is uncontaminated, in other words, doesn't have evidence on it, surface material that's close to an area where physical evidence has been deposited. And we use this to make sure that, that thing that your evidence is sitting on is not going to interfere. So for instance, let's say we have an arson that takes place like in a kitchen, right? And we want to know, did somebody intentionally set this fire, or was it a grease fire, or was it like electrical issues in the wall causing the fire? So what we would do is, let's say we have a pour pattern on the floor. We would go to that flooring and we would take a sample of that flooring that does not seem to have the evidence on it, but is, close, but not in the evidence. And we would take that sample of flooring and we would look at how its particular chemical makeup may, saying may, not always, interfere with the testing that occurs on the actual evidence, which could be an accelerant in that floor. Okay, what about for blood stains? All right, let me move myself out of the way here. All right, so let's say we have maybe a sheet or a pillowcase right here, and we're looking at this blood-stained area down here. This little sample that the technician is taking is going to be used for the substrate control. We're going to take a tiny piece of this fabric, and we're going to look at not only do the dyes of the fabric or perhaps any bleaching agents that might be on the fabric, are they going to interfere in any way with our testing of our actual evidence, which would be this blood down here. So you only need a tiny little bit, and it just needs to be close but not in the evidence. So that's what a substrate control is all about. Remember that anytime you are collecting samples, you have to follow the same sort of guidelines that you would collect crime scene evidence with. So you have to be very thorough and package them properly. Just want to make sure that everything is, done the right way. All right, self-check. A buccal swab is taken from what part of the body from the victim or the suspect? And the answer is the cheek. True or false? Substrate controls contain evidence. False. You don't want evidence in your substrate control. You want just the substrate so that you can test it. All right, now it's time to submit your evidence to the lab. So generally, most of the time, your evidence is going to be delivered in person to a laboratory, usually, in the CSI van or whatever, that type of thing. Or it could be shipped through the mail, just depends on where it's going and who's taking it. So you're just going to look at how far are we from the lab, what is the urgency of the case. If you're dealing with, let's say a serial killer that's going out and killing several victims throughout a week, that's maybe a tad bit more urgent than a cold case that's, hasn't been solved in years. If you're going to deliver it personally, which again is most of the time, the person that's delivering the evidence should know something about it. They should either be the person that collected it themselves, or they should be highly skilled in not only the collection, but also the delivery techniques, making sure that things that go in the fridge stay in the fridge and things like that. You can ship evidence by mail. If you ship it to, let's say, the FBI or something like that, you need to follow postal regulations. You cannot ship live ammunition because, it's dangerous. Explosives have to be mailed in a very specific way. It doesn't happen that often. Okay, we already had that. We need to make sure that we carefully package all of our materials because we want everything to be just the way it was when it was found at the scene. And we also fill out what we call an evidence submission form. So here on the form is going to be just the basics of the case. So up here, it's who's the investigating officer. You can see the address where the crime took place. It says type of offense was a homicide. We have 3 suspects listed here, and we also have, unfortunately, 3 victims. Okay. Down here on the bottom, it's going to say list and describe all the evidence. So we can see here that it's 1 black-handled survival type knife, blade length approximately 9 inches, handle approximately 5 inches. Detective Sergeant Mike Allen marked M. Allen 11-17-93 on the handle, which again, remember, is fine. You can mark directly on evidence if that evidence allows. So over here, it says circle as needed, and then it lists a whole bunch of different tests that can be done. So on this knife, our detective has suggested that they look for tool marks, latent prints. The medical examiner would, of course, be looking at things in the autopsy that might be related to this knife, such as the pattern that the knife makes, as it's being used. Serology refers to testing for not only blood type, but also DNA. And then trace evidence could be, maybe there's a hair, a fiber, something like that. Down here, there's some more information about the type of test that our detective is requesting. It says compare with any marks on the bodies of the victims to see if this could be the weapon used. Check for fibers, latent prints. The knife has a tube in the handle. Check inside the tube for any items, and if any items, check latent prints, fibers, and serology. So that could just be, a manufacturing thing. That's just how that knife was made. Or it could be like a hidden compartment in this type of knife. We don't know, but it's there, so we need to check it out. And then again, just here down at the bottom, it just says a summary of the crime, triple homicide of Byers, Moore, and Branch. So when this form is properly completed, this information will enable the lab analysts to, basically create a plan of action and examine the evidence in a way that makes sense. The case history, the brief description, makes a big deal because when you're dealing with, what do I do first? You would want to follow a logical sequence to not destroy some evidence while you're comparing others. So, you might want to check for fingerprints before you go and handle the knife any more than you need to for anything else, such as swabbing for blood. So the types of examinations that are requested don't necessarily have to match up exactly with what the detective, wants, or the ones that you do don't have to match up with the ones that are requested. You can do more examinations. You can do less examinations. It's just sort of like the initial, hey, you guys might want to look at this. All right, and then a list of all the items submitted has to be included. So that knife that was on that particular evidence submission form, if there were other forms of evidence other than that knife, each one would get its own form, and then there would be a master list that would say, hey, I'm submitting, these 5 forms, let's say, if we have 5 pieces of evidence. Okay, true or false? Explosive material evidence can be sent through the mail. We're going to say false. It's not recommended that any kind of explosives be sent through the mail, especially explosive evidence, which may be more unstable than a lot of explosives that you could buy for various things like, landscaping. You got to move a boulder or something like that. So evidence, no. All right, and that's the end of our slideshow. So that means that at this point, it's time to start the fun sheet. Remember that the fun sheet is a crossword puzzle today. So you're going to do that. Hopefully you're already done with the first half of it from watching the first video. And now you just finish that out. At the bottom of your fun sheet is a little bit of instructions. Let me see if I can bring that up in just a moment. That shows you what is necessary for your druggist fold. Okay, so let me bring this up and I'll show you right here at the bottom where that is. Okay. And we'll just zoom in. Sorry, it's taking me a little longer. Okay. All right, let me move myself out of the way. Okay, so right here it says take home assignment. Use your druggist fold, which you did from the warm-up, to gather a small amount of one form of trace evidence at your house or perhaps your workplace. Tonight, well, it says tonight, you just do it sometime today. Fibers, hairs, paint chips, metal or foil, dirt, makeup, pantry items, as long as it's very dry. Remember, it has to be dry. So you're just going to put a tiny little bit of that evidence in your druggist fold and label it correctly. So this is what you need. Your name, full name please, date and time collected, description of the type and condition of the evidence. So let's say you have a hair in there. This is a 13-inch long brown hair, suspected to be from the head of our victim, or something like that. And then secure it properly. Remember, you're going to tuck in those ends like I showed you on the video. And then you're going to bring in your druggist fold when we come back to school. And you get 5 bonus bucks if you've labeled everything correctly. Okay? So hopefully you'll have a chance to do that today. And that's that. So once again, this is our day today. I'm going to start with the warm-up. You've already done that. We have part 1. Part 2 is going to sit right here in a moment. And then if you are doing the digital version of the crossword, just make sure that you click here. It's very simple. Looks like this. I even gave you one to start with. You just type in the answers. And it's the exact same clues that are on the regular PDF crossword. They're just mixed up a little bit. So they're not in the same order, but it is all the same clues. And then right here, when you're all done, you can hit this page and it will give you, or hit this PDF version, and it'll give you a nice PDF version that you can send me as, proof that you did this assignment. P.S. If you go to press answer key, there's no answer key. Okay. All right. Y'all have a great day. If you need me for anything, please come to the help session for your period, and I'll see you later. Bye.